How to get better seed germination. That's today's topic. And we're going to break it down into three sections. First, I'm going to break down or talk about three temperature groups when you're germinating seeds. And then I'll talk about if you're going to germinate seeds or how to build a germination chamber for your seedling nursery, or at least show you what a germination chamber for a seedling nursery looks like. And then I'm going to talk about if you're germination testing for seed to see if it's good. So a couple techniques about that and another germination chamber. So let's begin with these three temperature groups for germinating seeds. So, and before I get into them, I just want to say there's a lot of vegetables in what I'm doing here. I have a little bit of flowers, but I don't have as much knowledge about flowers as I do about vegetables. So flowers are kind of limits of my germination knowledge. But once you understand some of the core things I'm talking about, like the germination groups, and we get a couple into the mediums for germ testing, then if you go and do some research about flowers, you'll be able to know how they fit into those groups, or be able to decide on your own how they fit into those groups. So just wanted to start with that little caveat. So there are three temperature groups that you should know about when you are germinating seeds. And these temperature groups are for optimal germination. Now, a lot of crops, the crops I'm going to mention, they can germinate at other temperatures, but it usually takes longer for them to germinate. And then so longer for them to germinate. So at these temperature groups, if you germinate at this temperatures, is when you have the quickest germination. So there's three groups. One where you're alternating 8 hours of 30 degrees Celsius, so that's 86 Fahrenheit in the daytime, and 16 hours of nighttime temperatures of 20 C, which is 68 Fahrenheit. The second group is keeping them at 20 Celsius all the time, so that's more or less room temperature. That's 68 Fahrenheit, and then 15 Celsius, which is 59 Fahrenheit. That's the third group, so keeping it a little bit cooler than room temperature all the time. So for the 30 C daytime, 20 C nighttime, to maintain these temperatures, you'll usually need to be in a greenhouse or in a germ chamber that's set for these temperatures. This is the most common group of crops you're going to find on a vegetable farm. And so it's, you got your beans, brassicas, your quinopods like beets, chard, all your nightshades, your cucurbits. Most crops like to germinate at this, and if I don't know what temperature to germinate something, this will be my first guess. And then if it doesn't work, I might try some of the other temperatures. So that's the first group. And the second group is that want to be at 20 Celsius, so 68 Fahrenheit all the time. And these, when we're testing them in our seed warehouse, we tend to just leave them at room temperature because room temperature is fairly close to 20 Celsius. And so onions, leeks, peas, lettuce, celery. It's a smaller list than the previous one, but these are the crops that germ well at this temperature. And then there's a group that likes to be cooler. So 15 Celsius, so that's 59 Fahrenheit. And so these often will have a cold room on farm that might be set at this temperature. Maybe it's a cold room that we're using to store tomatoes or peppers, the fruit of these crops that we're storing, that we wouldn't store at a really cold temperature, but just a little bit cooler than room temperature. So we'll put these germ tests here. So orac, spinach, nigella, poppies, and mosh, corn salad. These are crops that if it's a little bit cooler, will germinate much better. And this is something that nigella is a crop that frustrated me when we were doing germination tests for a long time. I was usually testing it at 30 degrees daytime, 20 Celsius at nighttime, and it just wasn't germinating the way I wish it would germinate. And then maybe it's because it's an early season crop that clued me into maybe try it at 15, and trying it at that temperature, it just pops out of the ground so quick. So so knowing the right germination group will help you get that great germination temperature. Now, so let's talk about germination chambers. And a germination chamber, this is really for that group that you're trying to get to be warm, that 30 degrees during the day or 20 at night. And so these germination chambers are chambers that you might put in your seedling nursery or greenhouse. And yeah, because so you got your greenhouse, your well, the one thing to think about with your plants is there's the germination phase, and then there's just the basic growing phase. And those are two separate phases. So when you're dealing with your germination phase, that's when you need the optimal temperature for it to germinate. And that's when it's going to germinate the quickest. Once it's done that, then you can have it grow in a greenhouse at more normal temperatures. They can be cooler than the optimal temperature if it's 30 degrees 30, 20. And it might be warmer than the optimal temperature, germination temperature, if you're talking about something like spinach or nigella. So it's the germination that really needs to be at that perfect temperature, and the growing afterwards can be at a different temperature. So here's a greenhouse, our greenhouse at Turner Soul Farm, where we're planting plants are growing away. Now, they'll have been started in a germ chamber that looks like this. This is not actually our germ chamber. Surprisingly, I don't really have pictures, or I couldn't find pictures quickly for this. But this is a picture of a germ chamber of a farm I visited about 10 or 15 years ago, a picture I used in an article I wrote a while ago. And so with this germ chamber, you can see that there's sand at the bottom of the box. And so that's maybe 2 to 4 inches of sand. And in it, there's a heating coil that's on a thermostat that can be as high as 30 degrees, but it might be more 26 to 28 degrees if you're kind of in a nursery and trying to save on temperature or save on electricity and all that. But so that sand is heated, and then the trays are placed on it, and then the thing is closed on top. In this case, it looks like it's maybe chloroplast that's on the frames, but it could be greenhouse plastic, old greenhouse plastic that you're using, or a thicker row cover that you're using to keep the heat in. And so that sand gets heated up and germinates your crop. Now you could have it on a thermostat, so it's higher during the day, closer to 30 C, and then at night it's 20 C. Or if you just want to set it at one temperature, having it set somewhere between 25 to 28 will be better than having it cooler. If it's just at one temperature, you don't want to have it at 30 C. That's too hot. So this is kind of what a germination chamber looks like. So just a box with a heating coil. And it can be fairly simple. You could just have it built and then, as I said, put row cover on top of it. Here is another example of this, and this is outdoors. And this picture I took, again, about 15 years ago, 10 years ago. This is at Société des Plantes de Kamouraska, so Kamouraska Plant Society. So this is a colder temperature than we are. They definitely have a lot of snow in April. Definitely cooler than us. Yet Patrice, at the time, and he may have changed these, but at the time, this is where he was starting a lot of his plants, including tomatoes, and so had a heating coil in it. And so it's just little mini greenhouses that were heated in a small area, and he could dig up the plants and then plant them out afterwards. So this is another example of the same concepts of a germination chamber, but doesn't have to necessarily be in a greenhouse. Though if it is in a greenhouse like this, it's going to give you more warmth that you can work with. All right, so let's get into germination testing. So the germination chambers here were really to start plants that you're going to plant outdoors. The germination testing, this is when you're going to be just seeing if seed germinates, which if you're a seed company or if you're relying on seed that you've kept from previous years, this is an important step. But even if you have leftover seed that you purchased and it's a couple years old, you might want to do some germ tests to see if it's good, though you might do it a little bit more sloppy than I'm showing here. So I'll start off with the mediums that you might have when you're doing a germ test. And so the medium is what you're doing the germ test on. So you could do a germ test between, and this is, you could replace these blotters with like napkins, but basically what I'm showing you here is trying to standardize your system so you have reliable, consistent results, which if you are a seed grower, like we are, it's important to do. And in this case, we're growing in small little petri dishes with blotter paper on it. So the three options would be to have the seeds between 2 blotter papers, and that's usually done for small seeds that don't need to be in the light. And then in sand, this would be something that you germinate larger seeds that sometimes don't have enough moisture with 2 blotters. And then on top of blotter paper, is especially for seed that needs to see the light. So this is the Petri dish. This is the germ test is already on. So this is what you're looking for, is seeds to pop out, and you can count them out. So if you're doing between two blotters, so that you'd have one blotter that's moistened, your seed, and then another blotter on top. The main crops that you'd be doing for this, your alliums like onions, leeks, your brassicas including radishes, quinopods, carrots. You may also do cucurbits like squash, melons, watermelons. They can work well in this context, and so these are those crops. And then now, specifically the cucurbits. Sometimes the cucurbits don't do as well between two blotters because there's just not enough moisture. And this brings us to germinating in sand. So here, these are beans, and so we'll take a cafeteria tray, and we're going to fill it with sand, and then we'll put in 100 seeds of the bean or pea that we're doing, and then more sand on top, and then it'll germinate in that. And the sand, before being put in here, is moistened. So we don't want it to be soggy. We don't want this to be sand soup that we're germinating in, but we want it to be moistened and to hold enough moisture. And then we'll often put a plastic over the germ test in this specific case to keep that humidity in. And so we use sand for big seeds that might dry out quicker on blotting paper. And we use sand it's sandbox sand that we'll buy from a local hardware store. And it's clean and it does well. And so we'll buy, in our case, for our seed company, we'll buy maybe 6 bags of sandbox sand for the year. And so the crops that we do almost only in sand are beans, peas, and corn. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes if things are having a hard time in blotter papers, specifically cucurbits, we might do them in sand. We occasionally do something like a quinopod, like chard or beets, in sand too. So sand is often a good backup. You could do it in potting mix or in peat moss if you want, but sand is fairly neutral and works well and easy to manage. And the last combination is just growing stuff on a blotter paper. So one blotter paper with the seeds on it, the blotter paper moistened, the seeds on it in the Petri dish. And these are crops that need light. And this is, sometimes some crops need more light, especially when they're freshly harvested, but we've kind of just created our systems around assuming they're going to use light. So lettuce and then the nightshades like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants will be on top of the blotter paper. All right. And then, so the germ test is, we'll set out 100 seeds in these conditions, put them in the temperature range that we were hoping for, and we'll get to the germ chamber in a moment, but we have those 100 seeds, and then after 3 to 5 days, depending on the variety, or depending on the crop species, we will go in and we'll pull out the sprouted seeds. And as we have a clicker on the left hand, as you can see here, and as the seeds are being pulled, we click away, so get an exact count. That goes into a spreadsheet, which you assumed I would be using. So we track each day that we count and how many seeds were germinated on that day, and then you can have a column that adds that up. And if you are starting with 100 seeds, well then the number of seeds that have germinated are clearly a percentage. It's like we had 45 total seeds germinated, that's 45%. If you do start with a different number than 100, let's say you start with 50 or 200, then you can just have the number that you counted divided by the starting number will give you your percentage. And this is where we do our germ testing for 30 degrees during the day, 20 at night. So this is a restaurant, I guess, commercial fridge that has been adapted, and we haven't done anything to change the way the fridge works. It's not plugged in the wall, basically, so it doesn't cool. It's just an insulated box. So you could make an insulated box, but you could also take a fridge that already exists and use that as an insulated box. And we have an incandescent light bulb in it, so this is what creates the heat in there, and it's on a timer to make sure, it's on a timer for the length of day, and it's also on a thermostat. We'll get to that in a moment. And then at the top, we have a grow light. This is probably just a simple light, fluorescent light, but you put equivalent of a grow light up there to create your sun conditions, your UV stuff that your plants that need sunlight will have. And this is on the whole time that the timer's on. So it's changed a bit, but this is basically what the setup looks like to control the germination. So on the left is a thermostat, and the light bulb is plugged into that thermostat, and it's set for 30 degrees Celsius, which means that if it goes beyond that, it stops heating and the temperature drops, and then if it goes beneath 30 Celsius, it heats up and until it hits 30 C and stops. So we're setting the light bulb to be at 30 Celsius. And then that whole setup is on a timer, and it runs 8 hours during the day. So there's 8 hours during the day that are warmed up, and then after that 8 hours, it just gradually loses heat to the ambient temperature. So we'll gradually cool down to room temperature, which is usually about 20 Celsius most of the year. If it's the middle of the winter, and if we're heating at 10 degrees Celsius during the night, that can cause some problems because the germ chamber will go beneath that 20 C dramatically. But if it's just going to 17 or 18, that's fine. So that's the timer. And then the grow light is also on that same timer. Now, it stays on independent of the temperature because it doesn't generate heat the same way as an incandescent light bulb. But the grow light is on the timer for 8 hours a day, and that's how we get our 30 degrees Celsius temperature and 16 hours of 20 degrees Celsius. So that's how to get some better germination. I'm going to be recording some more videos, maybe a little bit shorter than this, to answer some of the questions that you've been sending me lately. And if you want more resources that I've put together, you go to seedgrowers.farm, and you can find some recorded workshops I've done, seed spreadsheets, articles about keeping seeds. And you can also sign up for my email list. You can get these resources without signing up, but you're welcome to sign up for an email list. And I send 2 emails a week, one about spreadsheets and planning, one about seeds. And I also hope you check out the Seed Growers podcast. There's first season's out with interviews with fantastic people. And thank you for watching this. And I guess you should subscribe to this channel. There's a button somewhere down there. Go out and grow some seed.